Patrick cornered me at the church potluck, realtor's cards fanned across the fellowship table like evidence I was too confused to understand. "Dad Scott," he said, loud enough for the deacons to hear, "we need to talk about the house. You can barely manage the stairs. The market's hot. I've got 3 buyers ready." His smile was surgical, clean, professional, designed to make my silence look like senility. My stutter kicked in right on cue. I just need time. He cut me off, voice dripping concern. "You've had time. Sunday, 2 p.m. Open house. I've already scheduled the appraiser." The fellowship hall smelled like burnt coffee and casserole dishes that had been reheated too many times. I'd been wiping down folding tables, the kind with metal legs that left rust stains on your hands if you weren't careful, when Patrick arrived. Tuesday afternoon. The weekly potluck cleanup, something I'd volunteered for since retiring 3 years ago because it gave structure to empty weeks and kept me connected to people who remembered my wife's name. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed with that 60-cycle flicker that most people don't notice but that drills into your skull if you're paying attention. I was paying attention. I always pay attention. Patrick crossed the linoleum, scuffed beige tiles that the church council kept voting to replace but never budgeted for, with his phone already out, swiping through something he wanted me to see. He wore cologne. Something expensive that smelled like it cost more than my monthly electric bill, the kind of scent that announces arrival before the person does. It mixed badly with the potluck smells, created a cloying thickness in the air that made my throat tighten. His shoes were new. Leather Oxfords, polished to a sheen that reflected the overhead lights. No scuffs. No wear. The shoes of someone who doesn't do his own cleaning. He set his phone down on the table I'd just wiped, leaving a faint smudge of fingerprint oil on the damp surface, and fanned out 3 business cards like a poker hand he was certain would win. Sarah Chen, Prestige Realty. Michael Dorsey, Cascade Property Group. Linda Voss, Summit Real Estate Solutions. The cards were thick stock, embossed lettering, the kind that cost extra to print. Patrick had done research. Prepared. This wasn't impulse. This was strategy. "The stairs are dangerous," he continued, his voice carrying across the empty hall to where Deacon Morris was stacking hymnals near the piano. Morris glanced over. Witness acquired. Patrick knew exactly what he was doing. "Last time I visited, you were out of breath just getting to the 2nd floor. And the property taxes, what are they now? $7,000 annually. That's crippling on a fixed income. $7,200, actually. Paid in full every January since I bought the house in 1991. Never late. Never short." But I didn't correct him. My hands were still damp from the cleaning rag, and I noticed a slight tremor in my fingers. Not fear. Something else. The physical manifestation of restraint, of words being swallowed instead of spoken, of 32 years of courtroom discipline keeping my face neutral when I wanted to ask him who the hell gave him permission to discuss my finances in a public space. The stutter wasn't voluntary. It never had been. Childhood speech impediment that therapy had mostly controlled by college, but stress brought it back like muscle memory, turned my tongue thick and uncooperative. Patrick had learned to weaponize it. Noticed that when I stuttered, people's expressions changed. Shifted from respect to pity. From listening to managing. He created stress deliberately now, pushed conversational pressure points, then sat back and watched me struggle with words while he played the concerned family member. "I've already spoken to 3 buyers, he said, pulling up something on his phone. "Serious money. Cash offers. The market's insane right now, your neighborhood's averaging $485,000 for properties half the size of yours. We list at $520, accept around $495, and you walk away with enough to move somewhere appropriate." Appropriate. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Somewhere with handrails and emergency buttons and nurses who checked on you twice daily to make sure you hadn't fallen and couldn't get up. I was 64. Not ancient. Not incompetent. But Patrick had been building a narrative for months, little comments to my daughter Jennifer about my forgetfulness, concerned observations about my declining energy, suggestions that maybe someone should check in on Dad more often. Gaslighting wrapped in filial concern. I set down the cleaning rag, folded it carefully into quarters the way I'd been taught in basic training 43 years ago, and looked at the business cards. Didn't pick them up. Just looked. My throat felt tight, that specific constriction that comes from swallowing anger, and my jaw ached from clenching teeth I didn't realize I'd been holding rigid. I don't want to sell. The words came out broken, halting, exactly what Patrick wanted. Deacon Morris was definitely watching now. Patrick's expression shifted to patient sympathy, the look you give a confused elderly relative who's insisting they don't need help when everyone can see they do. Scott, this isn't about want. This is about reality. You're living alone in a 4-bedroom house you can't maintain. The roof needs work. When's the last time you had it inspected? The furnace is original to the house, 35 years old, could die any winter. And you're isolated up there. If something happened, if you fell or had a medical emergency, how long before anyone found you? He'd thought this through. Built a case. Identified vulnerabilities, real and imagined, and constructed a narrative of incompetence that sounded reasonable if you didn't know the actual facts. The roof had been inspected 8 months ago. Passed. Good for another decade. The furnace had been serviced in September. The technician, young guy with a clipboard and a scanner gun for inventory, had said it was built better than the new ones, could run another 20 years easy if I kept up maintenance. I had receipts. Documentation. But Patrick wasn't interested in facts. He was interested in optics. How things looked to witnesses. How I appeared when pressured. He leaned closer, lowered his voice to something approximating confidential concern. I've already contacted Sarah Chen. She's the top agent in the county, 42 sales last quarter. She can have a photographer there Friday, listing live by Monday. I just need your signature authorizing me to act on your behalf. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Pre-printed form. My name already typed in, Scott James Harlan. Property address correct. Sale price listed as $519,900. Commission structure calculated. Patrick's signature at the bottom as, authorized family representative. Just needed my signature to make it legal. He thrust a pen toward me. Mont Blanc. Heavy barrel, gold nib, the kind that cost $300 and made a statement about the person carrying it. The statement was, I have money and I want you to notice. Sign it now, Scott. Let someone competent handle this for you. Someone competent. The words landed like a slap, but I kept my face neutral. 32 years prosecuting felony cases teaches you to control your expressions, to hear insults and threats and lies without flinching, to wait for the right moment instead of reacting to provocation. Competent. I'd built case files that put away embezzlers and con artists and white-collar criminals who thought they were smarter than the system. I'd cross-examined expert witnesses and demolished alibis and constructed prosecutorial narratives so airtight that defense attorneys recommended plea deals rather than face trial. But Patrick saw an old man with a stutter who cleaned tables at church potlucks and assumed incompetence. His fundamental error. My strategic advantage. I reached for the pen with a hand that trembled slightly, intentional now, performed weakness, and watched Patrick's expression shift to victory. He thought he'd won. Thought pressure in public setting and the weight of that expensive pen would push me into compliance. Oh okay, Patrick. I'll think about it. His smile widened. Great. I'll schedule Sarah for Friday at 10 a.m. Make sure you're presentable. First impressions matter. He gathered his business cards, pocketed his phone, walked toward the exit with the confident stride of someone who'd just closed a deal. Deacon Morris returned to his hymnals, no longer interested now that the confrontation had resolved peacefully. I stood alone in the fellowship hall, holding Patrick's $300 pen, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my reflection distorted in the stainless steel coffee urn someone had left on the counter. Old. Tired. Defeated. Exactly the image Patrick wanted witnesses to see. I set the pen down carefully on the table, pulled out my phone, 5-year-old Samsung with a cracked screen protector I kept meaning to replace, and stopped the voice recorder app I'd activated the moment Patrick started talking. Recording duration, 11 minutes, 47 seconds. Audio quality, excellent. Every word documented. Every threat preserved. Every public humiliation captured in digital format that could be authenticated, time-stamped, submitted as evidence. Patrick had just committed his first prosecutable mistake. He'd underestimated the opposition. In the courtroom, we had a saying, the defendant who talks too much always loses. Patrick had talked plenty. Now I just needed to let him keep talking until he'd buried himself completely. I picked up the cleaning rag and went back to wiping tables, just an old man doing volunteer work, while the recorder file automatically uploaded to cloud storage with redundant backups. Nobody watching would have noticed anything except an elderly volunteer getting back to his chores after a brief family conversation. Perfect camouflage. The kind prosecutors use when building cases they intend to win. Home was 40 minutes north through winding county roads that turned from asphalt to gravel about halfway, the truck's suspension complaining over potholes the county never seemed to fill. I drove on autopilot, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, cracked leather grip worn smooth from years of use, while my mind catalogued what had just happened. Patrick's voice kept replaying. Someone competent. The condescension had been calculated, performed for witnesses, designed to establish a public narrative of my incompetence that he could reference later. Classic groundwork. Build the story first, then execute the plan once everyone believes the premise. I'd seen it 100 times in fraud cases. The con always starts with reputation damage. The house sat on 2 acres of pine and scrub oak, single-story ranch built in 1991 when lumber was cheap and contractors still framed with actual 2x4s instead of the undersized garbage they called dimensional lumber now. Vinyl siding that had faded from cream to something closer to bone, black roof shingles starting to curl at the edges but still functional, concrete driveway with grass growing through the expansion cracks. Nothing impressive. Nothing valuable by magazine standards. But it was mine. Paid off. Owned outright. No mortgage, no liens, no encumbrances. Just a clear title in my name held within a revocable living trust I'd established 13 years ago when Margaret got her cancer diagnosis and we'd needed to organize our affairs properly. Margaret had been gone 9 years now. The house still smelled like her sometimes, lavender sachets she'd tucked into closets and drawers, faded but persistent. I kept them there. Couldn't bring myself to throw them out. Patrick had never asked about the trust. Never inquired about estate planning or legal structures. He'd just assumed that an old man living alone in a modest house must be vulnerable, must be exploitable, must need someone younger and smarter to manage his affairs. Attribution error. The assumption that success and intelligence are visible, that power announces itself, that anyone living simply must be living that way from lack of options rather than choice. I'd retired at 61 with a prosecutor's pension, Social Security, and savings accumulated over 4 decades of living below my means. Margaret and I had never bought new cars, never took expensive vacations, never felt the need to signal wealth through consumption. We'd saved. Invested conservatively. Lived simply. The result was financial security that didn't look impressive from the outside but provided complete independence. Something Patrick would never understand because his entire identity was wrapped up in appearance, in the car he drove and the cologne he wore and the business cards he carried. I parked in the driveway, sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the wind moving through pine branches. My jaw still ached. I rolled my shoulders, heard vertebrae crack, felt the tension sitting in my neck like a physical weight. The house key stuck slightly in the deadbolt, needed graphite lubricant, another item on the maintenance list I kept on a legal pad in the kitchen drawer, but the door opened smoothly once the lock turned. Inside, the air was still and cool. Thermostat set to 68, controlled environment, no wasted energy. I dropped my keys in the ceramic dish by the door, handmade piece Jennifer had given me for Father's Day years ago, uneven glaze, imperfect edges, worth more than anything Patrick had ever bought, and walked directly to the kitchen table. The table was oak, scarred from decades of use, purchased at an estate sale in 1988 for $75. 6 chairs, though only one ever got used anymore. I pulled out the chair that faced the window, always sit where you can see approaches, habit from years of witness interviews in unfamiliar locations, and retrieved my legal pad from the drawer. Yellow paper. Standard letter size. Narrow ruled. I'd gone through hundreds of these during my career, filled them with case notes and witness statements and cross-examination strategies. The muscle memory of putting pen to paper was comforting, made my thoughts sharper, more organized. I drew a vertical line down the center of the top page. Left column header, what Patrick thinks. Right column header, what's real? Started filling in entries systematically, no emotion, just facts. Patrick thinks, I'm financially struggling. What's real? Checking account balance $47,312. Savings account $128,670. No debt. 0. Property taxes paid annually in full. Utilities current. Maintenance fund separate account, $18,000 available for repairs. Patrick thinks, I'm confused and incompetent. What's real? Recent physical exam, September, Dr. Morrison declared me in excellent health for my age. Blood pressure 120/78. Cognitive function normal. I manage my own medications, low-dose statin for cholesterol, daily aspirin, nothing that impairs judgment. I file my own taxes, maintain my own records, handle all correspondence without assistance. Patrick thinks, I need his help to sell the house. What's real? Property held in revocable living trust established April 2013. I am grantor, trustee, and primary beneficiary. Jennifer is successor trustee and inherits upon my death. Any sale requires my written consent, notarized, with 30-day cooling-off period per trust language drafted specifically to prevent coerced transfers. Patrick has zero legal authority. Patrick thinks, my silence equals consent. What's real? I was a felony prosecutor for 32 years. I know that silence is strategy. That the side which talks first reveals their position. That patience is tactical advantage. That documentation beats confrontation every single time. I stood from the table, knees protesting slightly, arthritis settling into the joints, manageable with ibuprofen and morning stretches but present, a reminder that the body ages even when the mind stays sharp, and walked to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom I used as an office. 4-drawer steel case unit, olive green, purchased surplus from the county courthouse when they renovated in 2008. Heavy gauge steel, locks that actually worked, drawers that glided on ball bearings instead of the cheap friction slides modern furniture used. I kept my files organized alphabetically with subcategories: estate planning, financial records, insurance, medical, property, taxes. Everything labeled, everything current, everything exactly where it should be. The estate planning folder contained the trust documents. 43 pages, legal size, bound with a navy cover. I'd read it completely when Margaret and I established it, read it again after she died to verify the succession provisions, read it periodically since just to stay familiar. The critical language was on page 17, section 8.4, any transfer, sale, or encumbrance of trust property requires written consent of the trustee, executed before a licensed notary public, with a mandatory 30-day rescission period during which the trustee may revoke consent without cause or penalty. No verbal agreements regarding trust property shall be considered binding. Margaret had insisted on that clause. She'd seen too many elderly relatives pressured into decisions by family members who viewed inheritance as something they were owed rather than something that might be gifted. The 30-day cooling-off period was her insurance policy against manipulation. I'd thought it was paranoid at the time. Now I understood she'd been prescient. Patrick's pre-printed authorization form was legally meaningless. Worthless. But he didn't know that because he'd never asked to see the trust documents, never requested estate planning information, never done basic due diligence. He just assumed that ownership meant vulnerability and proceeded accordingly. I returned to the kitchen table with the trust documents and my phone. Opened the browser. Searched, Sarah Chen Prestige Realty. Her website loaded, professional headshot, carefully styled blonde hair, teeth whitened to an unnatural brightness, tagline, your dreams, my mission. 47 5-star reviews, though I noticed all of them were from the last 6 months, which suggested either she was new to the field or she'd changed brokerages and the older reviews hadn't transferred. Top producer, Cascade County, 2025. Member, National Association of Realtors. Certified Luxury Home Marketing Specialist. The credentials were designed to impress. I clicked through to her contact page and opened a new email. Subject line, unauthorized representation notification. Body, Ms. Chen, I am writing to inform you that my son-in-law Patrick may have contacted you regarding my property at address. Please be advised that I have not authorized any sale, listing, or representation agreements. Any contracts or arrangements made without my direct written consent are void and unenforceable. I am 64 years old, of sound mind, and fully competent to manage my own affairs. This property is held in a revocable living trust of which I am the sole trustee with full legal authority. I request written confirmation that you will not proceed with any listing or marketing activities regarding my property without obtaining my personal written consent, executed before a notary public. Thank you for your professional courtesy in this matter. Scott J. Harlan. I read it 3 times. Remove the word please from the first sentence, too deferential, implied I was asking permission rather than stating facts. Changed request to require in the final paragraph. Stronger. More definitive. Sent. Timestamp, 4:32 p.m. Documentation established. If Sarah proceeded with a listing after receiving direct notice from the property owner, she'd be committing a knowing violation. Prosecutable. The email would prove intent. I sat back in the chair, felt the tension in my shoulders starting to release slightly now that I'd taken first action. The response had been bothering me since the fellowship hall. Why now? Why had Patrick's performance today pushed me from patience into action when I'd tolerated 2 years of condescension, dismissiveness, subtle undermining? The answer sat in my chest like a stone. Because he'd gone public. Because he'd performed my incompetence in front of witnesses, established a narrative that would spread through the church community, that would reach my friends and neighbors and former colleagues. He'd moved from private disrespect to public humiliation. From annoying son-in-law to active threat. And there was something else, something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Jennifer. My daughter had been pulling away for months. Cancelled visits. Shortened phone calls. Always had some excuse why she couldn't come by, why they couldn't make dinner plans, why Patrick needed her for something more important. I'd assumed it was natural, adult children building their own lives, establishing appropriate boundaries. But now I wondered if Patrick had been working on her, building the same narrative privately that he'd just performed publicly. Planting doubts. Suggesting concerns. Positioning himself as the reasonable one trying to help while her stubborn father refused assistance. If I didn't act now, didn't counter the narrative with documented facts, I'd lose more than my house. I'd lose my daughter's trust. My autonomy. My freedom to make my own decisions. Patrick wasn't just trying to sell my property. He was trying to establish grounds for declaring me incompetent. For taking control. For becoming my guardian and manager. And once that happened, once the legal system granted him authority over my person and my assets, fighting back would become exponentially harder. This wasn't about a house. This was about the rest of my life. Whether I'd spend it independent and free or managed and controlled. Whether I'd die in my own home on my own terms or warehoused in a facility where someone else decided when I ate and slept and received visitors. The stakes were existential. And Patrick had just shown me he was willing to play dirty, to lie publicly, to weaponize my speech impediment against me in front of witnesses. So the patience was over. The tolerance was finished. I'd given him 2 years to prove he could be trusted, to demonstrate he valued family over exploitation. He'd failed. Now he'd face consequences. I opened a new document on my laptop, 8-year-old Dell that ran slower every year but still functioned adequately for basic tasks, and began typing a timeline. Every interaction with Patrick since he'd married Jennifer. Dates, locations, witnesses, statements made. The foundation of a case file. Building documentation the way I'd done 1,000 times before. Methodically. Thoroughly. With an eye toward eventual prosecution. Because that's what this was now. Not a family dispute. A case. And I knew exactly how to build cases that couldn't be beaten. Friday morning arrived with that particular quality of light that comes through pine trees at sharp angles, dusty and golden, the kind that would have been pleasant if I wasn't preparing for battle. I'd woken at 5:30, internal clock never adjusted to retirement, still ran on prosecutor hours, and spent 2 hours staging the house for Patrick's visit. Not cleaning. Staging. There's a difference. Cleaning removes evidence of habitation. Staging creates a narrative. I left dishes in the sink, not many, just 2 coffee mugs and a plate with toast crumbs, enough to suggest someone who was struggling slightly with daily tasks. Pulled out my oldest cardigan from the back of the closet, the brown one Margaret had bought me in 1997 that had developed holes in both elbows and missing its second button from the bottom. Skipped shaving. Let the gray stubble show. Messed my hair slightly instead of combing it flat. The mirror showed me exactly what I wanted Patrick to see, an old man in decline, someone who needed help, someone who'd given up on appearances because maintaining them required energy he no longer had. Perfect camouflage. The email from Sarah Chen had arrived at 6:41 a.m. Mr. Harlan, thank you for your message. I want to assure you that I take client communications very seriously. Patrick did contact me about your property, and I have an appointment scheduled for 10 a.m. today to view the home and discuss potential listing strategies. However, I appreciate you reaching out directly. I'd like to clarify the authorization status before proceeding. Would you be available to speak briefly this morning? Best regards, Sarah Chen, Prestige Realty. Professional. Careful. The email of someone who'd received a red flag and was trying to navigate between a potential client and a potential legal problem. She'd copied Patrick on the message. I could imagine him reading it, his confidence cracking slightly, wondering why I'd contacted her directly, trying to calculate whether this was confusion or strategy. Let him wonder. I replied at 7:15, Ms. Chen, I appreciate your professionalism. I will be home at 10 a.m. I believe it would be beneficial for all parties to discuss this matter in person. Please proceed with your scheduled visit. Scott Harlan. Polite. Cooperative. Gave no indication of my actual position. Just an old man who wanted to talk. Patrick would interpret it as compliance, as me falling in line now that the professional realtor was involved. He'd come confident. Prepared to close the deal. The security system I'd installed 4 years ago, after the neighbor's house got broken into and I'd decided prevention was cheaper than replacement, was basic but functional. 4 cameras covering the driveway, front door, back door, and side yard. Continuous recording to a cloud storage subscription that cost me $12 monthly. Nothing sophisticated. The kind of system a retiree might install after reading about local crime in the newspaper. But it documented everything with timestamps that couldn't be disputed. I checked the camera feeds on my phone. All functioning. Battery backup active in case someone decided to cut power. Legal under single-party consent laws in this state. Admissible. At 9:47, I'd been watching the driveway camera. Patrick's Audi appeared, silver paint gleaming, followed by Sarah Chen's white Honda CR-V with the magnetic Prestige Realty signs on the doors. 2 vehicles. Patrick had told her to meet him here rather than coordinating arrival together. Establishing himself as the point of contact, the person in charge, the one who controlled access. They parked in the driveway, and I watched through the front window as Patrick climbed out first, gestured broadly at the house like he owned it, said something to Sarah that made her nod and pull out her camera from the back seat. A Canon with a large lens, professional equipment, the kind that cost thousands and screamed serious business. This wasn't a preliminary visit. This was a listing appointment. Patrick had told her this was authorized. Had lied by omission or directly, had created the impression that he had permission, that this was a standard family-assisted sale where the elderly owner needed help with logistics. I opened the door before they knocked. Gave them the advantage of surprise, made myself look eager, compliant. Patrick. Hello. My stutter was back, thick and pronounced. You be brought someone. Patrick's smile was wide, performative. Scott, this is Sarah Chen. Remember? We talked about her on Tuesday. She's going to help us with the sale. Us. The pronoun was deliberate. Created the illusion of partnership, of collaborative decision-making, when the reality was Patrick making unilateral choices and dragging me along. Sarah extended her hand and I shook it. Her grip was firm, professional, and her palm was slightly cool despite the morning warmth. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, dress slacks, low heels. The uniform of someone who wanted to be taken seriously. Mr. Harlan, it's very nice to meet you. Thank you for agreeing to this visit. Her voice was careful, measured. She was watching me closely, assessing, trying to determine if the email I'd sent was genuine concern or early-stage dementia. I shuffled back from the door, let them enter without objection. I am made coffee. If you want some. The offer was hesitant, the voice of someone trying to be hospitable but uncertain about the social protocols. Patrick waved it off. We're fine, Scott. Why don't you just relax while Sarah takes some photos and measurements? This won't take long. He moved into the living room without waiting for permission, Sarah following with her camera already raised. I retreated to the kitchen, sat at the table where I could hear them but remain out of sight, and pulled out my phone. Opened the voice recorder app. Started recording. Set the phone face down on the table where it looked like I'd just put it aside. From the living room, Patrick's voice, as you can see, original hardwood floors. They're in decent shape but dated. Buyers will probably want to refinish or replace with luxury vinyl plank. Sarah's camera shutter clicked repeatedly. The layout is good. Nice flow. How many square feet? 1,826. 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Built in 91, so we're looking at 35-year-old systems. HVAC is original, probably needs replacement within 2 years. That's a negotiation point, we can offer a credit or adjust the asking price to account for deferred maintenance. He was building a case for a lower sale price. Less money for me, but faster sale, easier transaction, higher likelihood of quick closure. Sarah's heels clicked across the hardwood as she moved to photograph different angles. Has there been any recent updating? Kitchen, bathrooms. Nothing significant. Scott's been here alone since his wife died. When was that? 9 years ago. He hasn't had the energy or resources to maintain the place properly. The lie was casual, effortless. Made me sound pathetic. Sarah's footsteps paused. Is Mr. Harlan planning to attend the listing consultation? I typically like to speak with the homeowner directly about their goals and timeline. A brief silence. Then Patrick, smooth, Scott has some cognitive challenges. Early stage decline. He gets confused about details, has trouble making decisions. That's why I'm helping coordinate this. His daughter, my wife Jennifer, and I have been trying to get him into assisted living for months, but he's resistant. We finally convinced him that selling is the right move, but he needs support through the process. Cognitive challenges. Early stage decline. Trouble making decisions. Each phrase was a brick in the wall Patrick was building around me, a legal and social structure that would justify his control, that would make any objections I raised sound like symptoms rather than legitimate concerns. The camera shutter continued clicking. I understand. These transitions can be difficult for families. Does Mr. Harlan have power of attorney established? Working on it. His lawyer's been dragging his feet, but we should have that finalized soon. In the meantime, Scott's cooperative. He knows this is necessary. Power of attorney. The words hit like ice water. Patrick wasn't just trying to sell my house. He was trying to establish legal authority over my person and my finances. Once he had POA, he could make decisions without my consent, could override my objections, could effectively strip me of autonomy while maintaining a veneer of legality. They moved through the house systematically. I heard them in the bedrooms, the bathrooms, Patrick providing narration that painted me as incompetent and the property as neglected. See this bathroom tile? Original. Grout stained, caulking's failing. Another thing buyers will want updated. The master bedroom, he's using it but barely maintaining it. Laundry piled up, dust everywhere. That was a lie. I kept the house clean, ran the vacuum weekly, did laundry every Sunday like clockwork. But Sarah couldn't contradict him without seeming unprofessional, and Patrick knew it. After 40 minutes, they returned to the living room. I heard Sarah say, "I'd like to speak with Mr. Harlan briefly, if that's all right." Jennifer called 3 hours later, her voice tight with the specific quality of anger that comes from being caught between loyalty to a husband and concern for a parent. "Dad, Patrick told me what happened. He said you recorded him without permission and humiliated him in front of a business associate. He's furious. He's talking about, I don't even know, legal action maybe." I was sitting at the kitchen table with the trust documents spread in front of me, yellow legal pad filling with notes about next steps, timeline of actions needed, sequence of documentation. The coffee had gone cold in my mug, but I'd kept drinking it anyway, barely tasting it, just needing the caffeine to fuel the planning process. "Did he play you the recording?" I asked. Silence. "Then, what?" "The recording. 49 minutes of him lying to a real estate agent about my mental competence. 49 minutes of him trying to sell property he has no authority to sell." "Did he let you hear what he actually said?" "He said you tricked him. Made him think you were confused when you weren't." Her voice carried doubt now, uncertainty creeping in. "I didn't trick him, honey. I let him reveal his true intentions. There's a difference. He came to my house with a realtor, told her I had cognitive challenges and early-stage decline, claimed I couldn't make decisions on my own. He lied, Jennifer. Systematically and deliberately. And I documented it." The sound of her breathing on the line, slightly fast, stress response. "Why would he do that?" "Because he's trying to establish grounds to take control of my finances and property. He mentioned power of attorney." "Did you know he was pursuing that?" Another pause. Longer. "He said it was just in case. For when you got older and needed help." "I'm 64. Healthy. Competent. I don't need help. I need Patrick to stop treating me like an asset he can manage." I heard her exhale, that particular sound of someone trying to process information that contradicts their existing worldview. "Can I hear the recording?" "Come over tomorrow. Bring Patrick if you want. I'll play the whole thing. Let you both explain which parts are misunderstandings and which parts are fraud." She didn't respond immediately, and when she did her voice was smaller. "He's going to be angry if I come without telling him." "Then tell him. I'm not hiding anything. My door's open. Noon tomorrow. I'll make lunch." After we hung up I sat staring at the phone for several minutes, running scenarios. Jennifer would come alone or she wouldn't come at all. Patrick would never voluntarily sit in my kitchen and listen to his own voice committing felonies. He'd forbid her from coming, or he'd accompany her and try to control the narrative, or he'd escalate in some other direction entirely. The question was which direction. Men like Patrick operated from ego and self-preservation. His carefully constructed image, successful son-in-law, helpful family member, competent professional, had been damaged. Sarah Chen would talk. Small county, tight business community, word would spread that he'd tried to list property without authorization. His reputation was compromised. Cornered animals attacked. I needed to be ready. Saturday morning I woke at 5:15 to my phone buzzing. Text message from Jennifer, "Can't make lunch today. Patrick thinks it's better if we take some space while everyone calms down. Maybe next week." I read it twice, looking for subtext. Patrick thinks. Not we think. Not I think. Patrick. He was controlling her access to me, filtering communication, establishing isolation. Classic abuse tactics, though Jennifer wouldn't see it that way. She'd see it as her husband being reasonable, wanting to de-escalate tension, protecting family harmony. I replied, "Okay. I love you. My door's always open." Kept it simple. No pressure. No guilt. Just statement of fact. She didn't respond. I made coffee, drank it standing at the kitchen window watching morning light filter through pine trees, and considered my options. Patrick had won round one, he'd cut off my access to Jennifer, at least temporarily. That gave him time to work on her, to rebuild his narrative, to reframe the recording as me being manipulative rather than him being criminal. I needed leverage that didn't require Jennifer's cooperation. Something that would force Patrick's hand regardless of whether my daughter believed me. The answer was sitting in my filing cabinet. Trust documents. Property deed. Documentation proving Patrick had zero legal standing. I couldn't wait for Jennifer to come around. I needed to establish legal barriers that made Patrick's schemes impossible regardless of what story he told. I called my attorney, Martin Vickers, at 8:30. His office was closed on weekends but his cell was listed for emergencies. He answered on the fourth ring, voice rough with sleep. "Scott. Everything okay? I need to file a notice of unauthorized activity on my property deed. And I need to discuss adult protective service protocols." His voice sharpened immediately. Sleep gone. What happened? I walked him through it. Patrick's coercion at the church, the fraudulent listing attempt, the recording, Jennifer's withdrawal. Martin listened without interrupting, and I could hear him moving around, probably finding paper and pen, shifting into attorney mode even on a Saturday morning. When I finished, he was quiet for several seconds. Then, this is elder exploitation. Textbook case. We need to act aggressively before he establishes any legal footholds. Can you be at my office Monday morning, 8 a.m.? Yes. Bring everything. The recording, the trust documents, timeline of interactions, any written communications. We're going to build a wall around you that Patrick can't penetrate. And Scott. Don't communicate with him directly anymore. All contact goes through me. If he shows up at your house, call the sheriff immediately. Don't engage. After we hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. Forward momentum. Action items. A strategy that didn't depend on convincing Jennifer or managing Patrick's ego. Just legal procedures executed properly. The law doesn't care about family dynamics or hurt feelings. It cares about documentation and authority and who has standing. I had all three. Sunday afternoon my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize. Local area code. I answered cautiously. Hello. Mr. Harlan. This is Deacon Morris from First Baptist. I wanted to check on you. Patrick stopped by the church this morning and mentioned you'd been having some health issues. Memory problems, he said. We're all concerned. My hand tightened on the phone. Patrick was spreading the story, building his narrative publicly, establishing his version of events before I could counter it. Creating facts on the ground. Deacon Morris, I appreciate your concern, but my health is fine. I have no memory problems. Patrick has been attempting to sell my house without authorization, and when I stopped him, he began spreading false information about my cognitive state. I'd be happy to provide my doctor's contact information if you'd like confirmation of my competency. Silence on the line. Then Morris, carefully, that's quite an accusation, Scott. It's documented. I have recordings and witness statements. Patrick has been lying to people, including real estate professionals, about my mental state to justify taking control of my property. It's elder exploitation. I've retained an attorney. Another pause. I see. Well. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. If there's anything the church can do, you can stop letting Patrick use church spaces to spread defamatory stories about my competence. If he approaches you again with concerns about my health, refer him to my attorney Martin Vickers. I'll email you the contact information. After Morris hung up, I sat on my porch in the cooling afternoon air and felt the situation crystallizing. Patrick wasn't retreating. He was attacking on multiple fronts, isolating me from Jennifer, spreading stories through the church community, trying to build public perception that I was incompetent. If he succeeded, if enough people believed his narrative, then my objections would sound like symptoms. My protests would become evidence of confusion rather than legitimate grievances. I needed to preempt that. Needed to establish my competence so thoroughly that Patrick's stories would look like obvious lies. Monday morning at 7:45 I drove to Martin's office in town, a converted Victorian house on Maple Street with a brass plaque by the door, Vickers and Associates, attorneys at law. Martin had been practicing estate and elder law for 30 years, had handled Margaret's will when she died, had drafted the trust documents that were now protecting me. He knew my history, knew my competence level, would be an excellent witness if this ever reached court. His secretary showed me to the conference room and Martin entered carrying a legal pad and digital recorder. He was 72, white hair combed straight back, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, wearing a cardigan over his dress shirt because his office was always too cold. We shook hands and he gestured for me to sit. Monday morning the courthouse smelled like floor wax and old wood and the particular staleness that comes from buildings where windows never open, where air circulates through ducts and filters but never really freshes. I'd spent 32 years walking through these doors, climbing these marble stairs worn concave in the centers from decades of foot traffic, sitting in these courtrooms with their high ceilings and fluorescent lights and American flags hanging limp against their poles. But always as the prosecutor. Never as the plaintiff. Never as the person seeking protection. The role reversal was disorienting, made my stomach tight and my shoulders tense, made me hyper-aware of every sound and movement. Martin met me in the hallway outside courtroom 3 at 8:45 a.m., carrying his leather briefcase, actual leather, not the vinyl composite most attorneys use now, the kind that had developed a patina from years of handling, corners worn soft, brass clasps tarnished. He wore his court suit, navy wool that had probably cost him $800 20 years ago and still looked professional because he'd maintained it properly, kept it pressed, rotated it with 2 others so the wear distributed evenly. "Patrick's here," Martin said quietly. "Saw him in the parking lot with Jennifer. She looks miserable. He looks angry. Perfect combination for us. Angry defendants make mistakes." I glanced down the hallway and saw them near the water fountain. Patrick wore a charcoal suit, probably cost $1,500, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie. Armor for court. Trying to look professional, controlled, like the reasonable party in this dispute. But his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping even from 30 feet away, and his hands kept flexing, opening, and closing, physical manifestation of rage he was trying to contain. Jennifer stood slightly apart from him, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. She'd lost weight. Her face looked thin, drawn, the expression of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. She hadn't responded to my letter. Hadn't called. Hadn't acknowledged receiving it. But she was here, which meant something. Whether it meant she supported Patrick or was simply fulfilling marital obligation, I couldn't tell. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors at 8:55 and we filed in. Martin guided me to the plaintiff's table on the left, set his briefcase down with a solid thunk that echoed in the empty space, began unpacking documents with methodical precision. Patrick and his attorney, some young guy I didn't recognize, probably from a firm in the city, wearing a suit that still had the sharp creases of something recently purchased, took the defendant's table on the right. Jennifer sat in the gallery directly behind Patrick, alone in the front row. Judge Carolyn Reese entered at 9 a.m. Exactly. I knew her from my prosecution days, sharp, no-nonsense, mid-60s, reputation for cutting through bullshit and focusing on facts. She presided over a dozen of my cases, knew my work, knew my competence level. Good draw for us. Bad draw for Patrick. All rise, the bailiff intoned, and we stood while Reese settled behind the bench, opened her folder, scanned the petition briefly. Be seated. We're here on a petition for protection from abuse and harassment filed by Scott Harlan against Patrick. She paused, checking the name, Morrison. Mr. Vickers, you're representing the petitioner. Martin stood. Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Chen, you're for the respondent. Patrick's attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. David Chen, Cascade Legal Group. Reese nodded. Mr. Vickers, this is your petition. Present your case. Martin approached the bench with a file folder, handed copies to the judge and to Chen. Your Honor, my client is a 64-year-old retired prosecutor who owns his home free and clear. The respondent is his son-in-law. Beginning approximately 6 weeks ago, the respondent initiated a campaign to gain control of my client's property through coercion, fraud, and false statements about my client's mental competence. When my client resisted, the respondent escalated to harassment, filing false reports with Adult Protective Services, and ultimately violating the temporary restraining order issued by this court. He opened the folder. I have extensive documentation. First, audio recording of the respondent making false statements to a real estate professional, claiming my client has cognitive challenges and early-stage decline. Second, sworn statement from that real estate professional confirming the respondent misrepresented his authority to list my client's property. Third, the fraudulent listing agreement the respondent attempted to execute without authorization. Fourth, the false APS report filed by the respondent after my client obtained legal representation. Fifth, police report from Deputy Santos documenting the respondent's violation of the temporary order last Thursday evening. Patrick's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, if I may, these allegations are taken completely out of context. My client was acting out of genuine concern for his father-in-law's welfare. Mr. Harlan has exhibited concerning behavior, including paranoia, social isolation, and difficulty managing routine tasks. My client was attempting to help, not exploit. Reese held up a hand. I'll hear your defense in turn, Mr. Chen. Mr. Vickers, continue. Martin pulled out a portable speaker, connected his phone. Your Honor, I'd like to play a portion of the audio recording. This is the respondent speaking to real estate agent Sarah Chen during an unauthorized visit to my client's home. He pressed play and Patrick's voice filled the courtroom, clear and damning. Scott has some cognitive challenges. Early stage decline. He gets confused about details, has trouble making decisions. That's why I'm helping coordinate this. His daughter and I have been trying to get him into assisted living for months. The recording continued for 3 minutes, Patrick's voice confident and dismissive, painting me as incompetent, claiming authority he didn't possess. When Martin stopped playback, the courtroom was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Reese's expression had shifted from neutral to cold. Mr. Chen, your client represented to a business professional that the property owner was mentally incompetent. Did he have medical evidence to support that claim? Patrick's attorney shuffled papers. Your Honor, my client observed behaviors that concerned him. I asked if he had medical evidence. Doctor's diagnosis. Cognitive assessment. Anything objective? No, Your Honor, but, so he made false statements to induce a business transaction involving property he doesn't own and has no authority over. She looked at Patrick directly. Mr. Morrison, stand up. Patrick stood slowly, his face flushed red. Reese leaned forward. Did you tell Sarah Chen that Mr. Harlan was mentally incompetent? Patrick's jaw worked. I said he was having difficulties. Did you have medical evidence of those difficulties? He stutters. He gets confused when a speech impediment is not cognitive impairment. Answer the question. Did you have medical documentation proving mental incompetence? Silence. Then quietly, no. Did you have Mr. Harlan's written permission to list his property for sale? We discussed it. He agreed, written permission. Yes or no? Patrick's hands were shaking now, knuckles white where he gripped the table edge. No. Reese sat back. Mr. Vickers, what else do you have? Martin handed up another document. Medical evaluation from Dr. Richard Morrison dated 2 weeks ago. Comprehensive cognitive assessment. Mr. Harlan scored perfectly on all tests. The doctor's written opinion states that Mr. Harlan is fully competent, cognitively intact, and capable of managing his own affairs. I also have Mr. Harlan's financial records showing substantial assets, zero debt, and meticulous record keeping. And I have property documentation proving the home is held in a revocable living trust that requires notarized written consent for any transfers. The respondent knew or should have known he had no authority, yet proceeded anyway. Patrick's attorney tried to recover. Your Honor, my client was concerned about his father-in-law's safety. The property is large, the maintenance demanding for a man of Mr. Harlan's age. My client was trying to help facilitate a transition to more appropriate housing, by lying about his mental state. Reese's voice was sharp. By bringing a realtor to his home under false pretenses. By filing false reports with APS when the victim obtained legal representation. This isn't concern, Mr. Chen. This is exploitation. She flipped through the police report. And then your client violated the temporary order. Deputy Santos's report states that Mr. Morrison came to Mr. Harlan's home Thursday evening, pounded on the door, kicked it, demanded entry, and refused to leave until law enforcement arrived. How is that protective concern? Chen had no response. Patrick sat down heavily, the air going out of him, the reality settling in that he'd walked into court expecting to defend against an overreaction and instead was facing a judge who saw him exactly as he was. Reese looked at me. Mr. Harlan, would you like to address the court? I stood, and my voice was clear, steady, no trace of 3 months later I stood on my porch at dusk watching winter settle into the pine trees, the particular quality of January light that turns everything blue and cold and sharp-edged. The house was quiet behind me, heat running efficiently through ducts I'd had serviced in November, roof solid overhead, foundation secure beneath worn floorboards that creaked in familiar patterns when I walked. Everything exactly as it should be. Everything mine. The restraining order was filed in my cabinet under legal documents, 5-year protection that made me legally untouchable, but I kept a copy folded in my wallet anyway, the paper going soft from handling, corners wearing through. Hadn't needed to show it to anyone. Patrick had vanished completely from my life the day Reese signed that order, disappeared like he'd never existed except for the wreckage he'd left behind. I'd heard through church gossip, Deacon Morris stopping by one Sunday with a casserole and carefully worded questions, that Patrick and Jennifer had separated. That she'd filed for divorce in November. That Patrick had moved to Seattle or Portland or somewhere distant where people didn't know what he'd tried to do, didn't know he'd been publicly destroyed in court by the old men he'd tried to exploit. Morris hadn't said it with satisfaction, had said it like tragedy, like this was a family torn apart by misunderstanding rather than a predator being stopped. I hadn't corrected him. Let people think what they wanted. I knew the truth and so did the legal record, and that was sufficient. Jennifer hadn't contacted me. Not once in 3 months. I'd sent her 2 more letters, handwritten on good paper, explaining calmly and factually what Patrick had done, what evidence existed, why I'd acted as I had. Offering to meet whenever she was ready. Telling her I loved her. Both letters had gone unanswered. Whether she'd read them or thrown them away unopened I didn't know. Whether she blamed me for destroying her marriage or blamed Patrick for forcing the destruction I couldn't tell. The not knowing sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold, something I carried everywhere but had learned to function around. I'd saved her from a man who would have eventually turned his exploitation toward her, who would have used her trust the way he'd tried to use my perceived weakness. I protected her even though protection looked like destruction from her perspective. Someday she might understand. Someday she might come back. Or she might not. That was her choice to make, and I couldn't force it any more than I could have let Patrick continue unchallenged. Martin had called in December with news that the district attorney had declined prosecution. Not enough evidence of criminal intent, they'd claimed, though Martin and I both knew it was really about resources and priorities. Elder exploitation cases were hard to prosecute, juries were unpredictable, and Patrick had fled the county anyway, so what was the point? I'd told Martin I didn't care about prosecution. The restraining order was enough. Patrick was gone and I was free, and that was the only outcome that mattered. But sometimes late at night I wondered if letting him escape without criminal charges had been mercy or mistake. If somewhere in Seattle or Portland he was finding another target, another elderly person to assess for weakness, another family to infiltrate and exploit. If my victory had just displaced the threat rather than eliminating it. Those thoughts came at 3 a.m. When sleep wouldn't hold, when I'd wake to silence and darkness and the particular loneliness of old age, of houses too big for one person, of futures that grew shorter every year. Then I'd get up and make coffee and sit at the kitchen table reviewing my files, reminding myself that I'd done what was necessary, that competence sometimes required cruelty, that protecting yourself sometimes meant accepting that people you loved would hate you for it. The church had been awkward after the court case. People didn't know how to act around me, couldn't tell if I was victim or aggressor, if Patrick had been stopped or if I'd overreacted to ordinary family concern. I'd stopped volunteering for potluck cleanup. Stopped attending Bible study on Wednesday nights. Kept showing up for Sunday service but sat in the back and left immediately after, didn't linger for fellowship or coffee, didn't give anyone opportunity to ask careful questions or offer concern that felt like judgment. Eventually the discomfort faded into acceptance. I became the old man who kept to himself, who'd had some family trouble nobody quite understood, who was pleasant enough but distant. Fine. I'd spent 32 years as a prosecutor making decisions that isolated me, that made me unpopular, that prioritized justice over likability. This was just more of the same. The house had never been cleaner, never more organized. I'd spent the autumn months going through every closet and drawer, sorting Margaret's remaining clothes and belongings, finally packing away the lavender sachets that had been losing their scent for years, keeping a few items that mattered, her wedding ring, the ceramic dish Jennifer had made, a photo album from our early years, and donating the rest to Goodwill. Purging. Streamlining. Reducing my life to essentials that could be managed by one person with no help needed or wanted. The maintenance schedule was posted on the refrigerator, each task listed with completion dates, furnace serviced in September, gutters cleaned in October, chimney inspected in November, roof checked in December. Everything current. Everything documented. If I died tomorrow, someone sorting through my affairs would find everything in order, every system functional, every responsibility fulfilled. No confusion. No mystery. Just a competent man who'd maintained his autonomy until the end. Christmas had been difficult. First one alone in 43 years. Margaret had always made the holiday warm somehow, had decorated and cooked and played music and created the feeling of home rather than just house. Jennifer had continued the tradition after Margaret died, coming over on Christmas Eve with Patrick in tow, bringing food and presents and laughter that filled the empty spaces. This year I'd hung no decorations, cooked no special meal, sat in my living room watching winter light fade to darkness while carols played tinnily from the radio. Deacon Morris had invited me to the church dinner. Several neighbors had mentioned I was welcome at their family gatherings. I declined politely, claimed I was tired, wanted a quiet day. Truth was I couldn't face the pity, the carefully sympathetic expressions, the awareness that everyone knew my family had fractured and nobody knew exactly why, but they'd all formed opinions anyway. Better to be alone than to be the object of speculation. On Christmas morning I'd driven to the cemetery where Margaret was buried, plot on a hillside overlooking the valley, simple granite marker with her name and dates and the inscription, beloved wife and mother, that Jennifer and I had chosen together 9 years ago. The ground was frozen hard, dusted with snow, my footsteps crunching loud in the silence. I'd stood there for 20 minutes telling Margaret what had happened, explaining my choices, asking if I'd done right. The stone had no answers. Just cold granite and dead flowers someone else had left months ago, brittle and brown. I'd driven home feeling older than 64, feeling every year and every decision, every case I'd prosecuted and every relationship I'd sacrificed for principle. Wondering if righteousness was worth the cost or if I'd just been too stubborn to bend when bending might have preserved something more important than being right. But then January came and with it a subtle shift, a gradual easing of the weight I'd been carrying. The days started lengthening, light returning minute by minute, the winter solstice passed and the arc of the sun climbing higher. I woke one morning to fresh snow covering the driveway, 22 degrees outside, everything white and clean and quiet, and realized I wasn't waiting for the next attack anymore. Wasn't braced for Patrick's return or Jennifer's accusation or the church's judgment. The threat was gone. The legal barriers had held. I was simply living, day by day, in the house I'd protected, with the autonomy I'd fought for, accountable only to myself. The freedom was disorienting at first. Decades of marriage and then years of managing Patrick's encroachment had created constant awareness of other people's needs and agendas, constant calculation of how my choices would impact them. Now there was just me. My schedule. My preferences. My decisions made without consulting anyone or justifying anything. I could eat breakfast at 9 or noon or not at all. Could leave dishes in the sink for 2 days if I felt like it. Could spend entire afternoons reading or walking my property or doing absolutely nothing productive. Nobody would know. Nobody would care. Nobody would interpret my choices as evidence of decline. The responsibility was mine and so was the peace. I started taking longer walks on my property, following the fence line I'd installed years ago, checking posts for rot, clearing fallen branches, relearning the land I owned. 2 acres of pine and scrub oak and granite outcroppings that would never be valuable by developer standards but were mine completely, paid for, protected by legal documents that Patrick couldn't touch and never would. The winter air was cold enough to make my lungs ache but clean, sharp, nothing artificial or performed about it. Just weather. Just trees. Just the sound of my boots on frozen ground and my breath puffing white and crows calling from high branches. Sometimes I'd stop at the property's far corner where you could see across the valley to distant mountains, blue-gray and eternal, and I'd remember being young, being married, being a father with a future that seemed unlimited. That man was gone now. In his place was someone harder, more isolated, more competent at survival but less certain about whether survival was the same as living. The trade-offs were clear. I had my house but I'd lost my daughter. I had my autonomy but I'd destroyed a marriage. I had legal protection but I'd burned bridges with my community. Every gain had cost something. Every victory had left scars. Was I better off? The question didn't have a simple answer.